I know I have not been on this channel for some time now, uploading videos. My heart just is not into um cinema anymore, as it once was a couple years ago. When I first started this channel, my whole goal was to um cover the history of franchises, the famous franchises. But Hollywood kind of kicked that passion out. It kind of destroyed it. Then I switched over just to, you know, just talking about Godzilla and Kong, uh, Jurassic Park horror flicks, and all that other stuff, which I still technically want to do, but I just don't have the deep passion as I once did. But one of the last things I talked about on this channel, especially when it came to talking about different franchises and all that, but particularly the video probably 2 or 3 years ago about Canon Films. Now, Canon Films uh, was one of the things. Shoot, I was probably watching a Canon film almost every day, probably 5 years ago. But unfortunately, one of the biggest stars that came out of Canon Films, Chuck Norris, has passed away. I think we all know this by now. When I was first introduced to Chuck Norris, it's probably The Way of the Dragon, and that fight scene with him and Bruce Lee. And I don't know who's seen that movie, but it didn't go the way of Chuck Norris's character where he wanted to go. I always find it funny that fight, how they was easily getting bruised up. But I guess you hitting each other like that, I guess that would make sense. But that was probably when I was first introduced to Chuck Norris, and then I heard of Walker, Texas Ranger. That show was always, if you had a grandparent, that show was always on for some reason. At my great grandma's house, that show was always on next to Maury and Jerry Springer or whoever else was on regular TV. Now, I never really got into Texas Walker Ranger like that, or Walker Texas Rangers to say. Nah, I seen episodes, but I just wasn't into it like that. I think they even made a reboot with Sam Winchester from Supernatural. I don't know how that went. But I think the best part of Chuck Norris's career for me is his films, especially those Canon films, which I really started to love a lot watching them. I can go down a long list. Silent Rage is one of them. Silent Rage, I actually like that one. That could be like the predecessor. I wouldn't say the predecessor to Superhuman or Super Soldier, but it really wasn't anything like that. But that was actually a low key good film. I'm not gonna go too much into it. I like that one a lot. I know everybody likes Delta Force. Delta Force is cool. I did like the Mission in Action, the fake Rambo. The mission actions are funny, and I think they're, like I said, an answer to Rambo. I just never got the order of the mission actions. Mission action, then Mission Action 2 was like a prequel or something like that. I was always confused about the whole chronicle order of those movies. But another one I liked the most was Invasion USA. I think a lot of people likes that one. Code of Silence, it's all right. Lone Wolf McQuade, I actually like that one too. But I seen a lot of his movies, like rewatched a lot of his movies probably about like 6 years ago. It was probably during the vid. So I had some time to watch a lot of those movies over and over again. But like I said, going back to Texas Walker Range, I just wasn't a big fan of it. But I will say this. He was probably one of the most iconic film action stars of the 80s. Of course, next to Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger and those guys, which of course I like. You guys, well, maybe not, I don't know. It's been a long time since I've been on this channel to be talking about that type of stuff. But when I heard the news on Friday, I was devastated. But then I started laughing. I started thinking of the memes, No, Death didn't get Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris is so tough, he bypassed death and walked themselves into the gate of heaven to face Bruce Lee again. And Bruce Lee challenged him to a duel. And Chuck Norris obliged. But that's probably what most people know Chuck Norris for is too, is those memes. Chuck Norris is so tough. I think that Family Guy started that. That's why the first time I heard those memes come up, Chuck Norris is so tough. I think one of the jokes on Family Guy, Chuck Norris is so tough, he had an extra chin under his beard or something like that. But the thing I don't like surrounding this death, other than, someone passing away, is always the reaction to death. And there's a pattern here. When someone goes against the grain, I guess, if you want to be called being a conservative or Christian going against the grave, you're always going to have the crazy you-know-whats saying all kinds of out-of-pocket stuff after this person passed. We've seen it with Hulk Hogan, and we've seen it with Charlie Kirk. I mean, definitely have seen it with Chuck Norris. If you tend to vote red, these people will spit on your grave and have no shame about it. But I'm not going to get into that. Like I said, Chuck Norris was an American icon, a martial artist. He was so tough. Like Family Guy said, he had an extra chin. An extra fist under his chin. But anyways, it's always sad when your childhood idols pass away. Rest in peace, Chuck Norris.